Welcome to CTCAP's Faith and Work panel discussion. We have Anand Mahadevan. He's the lead planter of New City Church, Mumbai. He's also an author as well as a business journalist. We also have Ms. Lee. She used to be a consultant with KPMG Malaysia, and she's currently the Regional Director of Christianity Explored East Asia. And then we have Mr. Mark Morley, who is the current Australian Trade Commissioner, India and Pakistan. I'll just give them a couple of moments to give a slightly more detailed introduction to themselves and their context. Maybe we'd like to start with the ladies first. So Sue, could you kick us off with that?
Thank you, Thea. Let me introduce myself. So as Thea said, my name is Sue. I'm currently the Regional Director for Christianity Explored in East Asia. What I do is that I work with a team of amazing people all over East Asia, and I mainly look into strategy planning and execution. I oversee projects and new developments for Christianity Explored. We work with local churches to implement CE is part of the evangelism effort, and we also partner with organizations to encourage biblical evangelism. And we do all of this so that many more unreached people can hear the gospel in this part of the world. In addition to that, I'm a leader and a council member in my local church, as well as a synod member on a diocese level. In my previous job, attached to the Big Four, I was in business development and consulting division. So I mainly do project management. I implement business changes, and my clients are mostly banking, financials, oil and gas. Yeah, my passion is to share God's word at various capacity. So I run workshops and I give talks to encourage women in ministry, and I do that either through one-to-one or in groups. I teach the Bibles in schools, in small groups, in camps, and in women's group, and generally just looking for ways to disciple and encourage people in ministry as a whole. In addition to that, I help my husband run the business, doing whatever that he needs me to do, just sharing that responsibility, as well as a mother to two young children. So today I'm speaking to you as someone who has an experience in the corporate world, who runs a business currently, and who also is a leader in ministry. So I hope that's helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for that very detailed introduction. Anand, would you like to go next and give our viewers a bit of background into who you are, what you do?
Sure, thank you. I think it's wonderful that in this time we're having opportunities like this to kind of discuss faith and work. It's very important. As Thea was sharing, I wear two hats. I've been working as a business journalist in India for about 25 years now. And about 7 years ago, we began work on planting New City Church in Mumbai. We meet in downtown Mumbai. And the vision of the church is to reach well-educated English-speaking professionals, artists, and entrepreneurs, and disciple them to serve the poor and the oppressed. So it's been an interesting world, kind of straddling both the worlds in a sense. It's been a joyful journey most of the time, but there have been challenges. And, one job is hard enough these days. So many demands, so many pressures, to juggle two can be challenging at times. Married to Ajita. We've been married almost 20 years now. And God's been weaving an interesting story through our marriage and through our family as well. Because on the one hand, while I've been kind of engaging with some powerful businessmen in the country, and my wife has been working with trafficked women. And so we've, God in His grace has kind of helped us, given us an exposure to, the top end of India and the very bottom as well. And we've been learning to faithfully grow in this together. We have two teenage children, and India's in a lockdown, so we've had a lot of good family time together. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's called The Grace of God and Flaws of Men. It comes recommended by Dr. Ravi Zacharias and Tim Keller. You can find it on Amazon. I guess that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Anand. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Thea, and what a joy it is to be here today. It's a little bit cold where I am compared to all of you. I'm in regional Victoria, about 120 kilometres north of Melbourne. Up until 4 weeks ago, I was living in India, and I had to leave incredibly abruptly. I left with about 12 hours notice. My wife and kids had already been shipped out of Delhi before that, but I work as a senior trade official and a diplomat with the Government of Australia. I'm obviously here in my personal capacity, but I manage teams across northern India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And I've been abroad for about the last decade in the Middle East and in India. And I've worked and studied in countries like Syria and Egypt and 5.5 years in Saudi Arabia. So I've spent much of my life somewhere else. So the biggest disruption at the moment, of course, for me is being here back in my home country, in my hometown of 100,000 people. My passion, and it was nice hearing Sue's passion, my passion's helping others see their work as part of a vocation that God's called them to, rather than just to make cash in. And I think that's been a kind of a personal journey for me too. I wrote a book last year about Christianity and religious minority law. I'm a law guy by background. I belong to a church called New City in Delhi, which is part of the City to City network. And I'm kind of between churches and between places. And I also attend an Anglican church here in regional Victoria. I've been married 16 years. We've had 4 kids together, and they're pretty young. They're under 10. And it's a joy to be here. And thank you, Thea, for having us.
Yes. Well, I realized in all of this, I actually forgot to introduce myself. So my name, for everyone who does not yet know, my name is Thea, and I'll be facilitating today. So thank you very much for giving all our viewers just a little bit of a peek into each of your lives. I think, what's really interesting is that each of you have such varied backgrounds, and you are in such different positions in each of your lives. Like with Sue, you're taking on so many different roles in business and at home, and with the ministry, and even in your local church. And for you, Mark, you have a very interesting position, being sort of Australian Trade Commissioner, but in a region that is completely foreign to you, which I'm sure is no longer foreign to you after all these years that you've spent there. And Anand, you wear so many different hats as well, being pastor, author, journalist, and so given just the breadth of your work experiences and how you're spreading yourself across so many different platforms in that sense, I just wanted to ask, what's happening at work with you guys right now? I mean, with COVID, everything's, I think everyone can resonate with the fact that everything's turning upside down, right? So what's happening at work with you guys right now, and where are you at, and how has COVID, impacted your professional lives?
I'm happy to go first. Yeah, I think for us, we broadly see that it's divided into 2 terms, which is that what has changed and what has not. So some things have changed, but some things remain. What has changed, obviously, is that there is now a physical distancing, and the things impacted by that, the inability to gather together. A lot of things have shifted to digital platform. A lot of us are not traveling, and any of our jobs that requires us to face our client, we're unable to do so physically and to have face-to-face contact. And we have resorted to using online presence to reach them. We've had many conversations with churches to see how we can better support them. And a lot of them are just having a really difficult time to adjust, especially the smaller churches that has got less support, to be able to quickly shift to a platform and still encourage people to keep together because they're unable to meet up. We try to encourage more online evangelism by decentralizing the efforts of what we're usually used to do from a church point of view, to enable us to reach more people groups and to bring the gospel to where people really are, which is that they're mostly at home and in communities, and they're unable to come to church. And so because we can no longer be in the same place, I think what has happened is that as middles all realize how dependent we are on the system that in existence has kept us together, and in some way has become like a crutch for us. We need more intentional efforts and creative ways now to keep loving one another and to keep keeping in touch with one another. In our current work context, from a ministry point of view in Christianity Explored, our role is a content provider. So what we have done immediately after the lockdown is that we have opened up all of our resources and made it available as free access to support the churches without cost, so that they're able to fulfill the Great Commission and not have to worry about how costing is affected at this point in time. Then we provide ongoing support, keep speaking to churches to see how they're dealing with the situation and what we can do to help. Some of our development projects have been put on hold, some indefinitely, but others we're continuing, and we're working around things because each country's restriction controls are different, and we're just trying to see how we can do and as much as we can do. We have switched to meeting needs of certain groups that we previously couldn't do due to limited time and resources, and we're just trying to meet people where they are as they go through suffering, as they're in doubt, and as they're asking the questions. Yeah. Yeah, but what has not changed is that relationally things have not changed. We are separated, but we're not being stopped from meeting together as the people of God. And we're still called to be salt and light. And so there is always a place for the Christian to remain honest and to uphold justice, to be generous, to have integrity. In fact, now more than ever, and because of what has happened, what it has done is that it's kind of allow people to reset the system, to put the brakes and to stop what they've been doing, and to allow people to take stock. And even now, as we shift towards, some countries are opening up, and we're slowly trying to get back to normal or the new normal. We're taking the opportunity to kind of just examine a bit and to see if we have been doing things right, and to reevaluate our priorities, whether they have been done for temporary or eternal purposes, and to know that God is still working in us in the midst of these circumstances. There are still sins in our lives. There are idols in our lives that need to be exposed, and God cares about those things. And having a situation like the COVID is a good wake-up call. I think it's been a long time since the modern world is allowed to pause for a moment, to take heed and to actually just listen to God, and we have been forced to do that. And I think a lot of times I don't know, but from the conversations that we have with a lot of people is that they kind of see the Christian life on Sunday as a separate ball, and then they see their work life, their personal life, their family life as all separate, and that God only cares about what happens on Sunday. But He is the God over everything in our lives, and we're called to be accountable in all of those areas. They are equally important in God's eyes, and that includes our work and the things that we do for Him as we have a vocation.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that. If I hear correctly from you, Sue, it seems like even though there's been a lot of restrictions, on us physically because of COVID, it seems like you somehow finding new freedoms in a way, in terms of being liberated to love others in different ways, through your work, and of course with Christianity Explored, making your content available, and all of that. It just sounds like it's a challenging of the preset mindsets that we used to hold, and once that's sort of broken, then there's some kind of freedom to sort of live in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, God is able to bring good out of it.
Amen. Anand, Mark, would you guys have anything to share about where you're at work, and what some of the challenges that you're facing, or anything to add to what Sui has just said?
Yeah, sure. if I may step in, just because I'm on the panel doesn't mean that I don't have challenges. It's been a season of uncertainty for all of us. So I want to share from both the worlds, from my life as a business journalist and both as a pastor. As a business journalist, it's been an interesting time because in India, I think we are now we've had almost 3 months where business has been disrupted. And so business has pretty much come to a standstill. Only the bare essential is kind of moving on. Personally, I've been impacted by the uncertainty as much as anyone, because I was in the process of, in my work with a newspaper called the Economic Times, which is the largest newspaper. I was kind of in the process of transitioning from my old job into a new job where I could actually spend less time working, so I could kind of give more time to things, like church planting and all of that. So in the uncertainty, I'm kind of in a phase where I no longer have the old job, but the new job hasn't kind of materialized. So the pain, the uncertainty, the doubt, the anxiety, they're very real. And so it's been so personally, I think this uncertainty and the challenges, and I'll talk about that more later as well. I think that's really helped test our roots in God. I think, and I've always believed that faith is tested, refined, not in times of comfort and success, though it is also, but I think it is even more tested and refined in times of adversity. And so that's on the business journalist front, but it's been kind of also just to watch the illusion of control just dissolve. Businesses have been making plans, and and I've been privy to a lot of this through several conversations with several CEOs, and all the plans I've made have just dissolved. It's like they've vaporized into thin air. So control, which we all thought we had, whether it's in our life as individuals or in the life of large organizations, corporations, businesses, that illusion of control has just vanished. As a pastor, church planter, I think again it's been a pretty challenging time because from a couple of perspectives, and people are hurting. In India there are millions of people without jobs, and as a church you really want to be there and serve in whatever little way that we can. That's important. And also it's also been a joy and a challenge. Joy because I've seen people in the congregation really discover their faith, and I've seen them rise above the uncertainty. Several people in our church have taken pay cuts. A few have lost their jobs, but to see their faith, so that's been a joy. It's also been challenging because people are searching for purpose. Work is not as big in their life as it used to be. And work is a creation purpose, but it's not the only creation purpose. Work is an extremely important part of what God created us for, but it's not the only important thing. And so it's been kind of, people have been navigating, there's suddenly a big vacuum. Work is not as consuming as it used to be. And what does that mean? And people are trying to figure that out as much as I've been trying to figure that out myself. So it's been an interesting journey, not an easy one, but a journey. I think I'm personally growing in my faith, and I'm seeing a lot of people grow in their faith. So that's been a joy to watch.
Thanks a lot, Anand. I'm just going to stick with you a little bit there. Sorry, Mark, did you have something that you wanted to jump in and say? I just wanted to follow up with Anand on a couple of things. So, I mean, sure. You said, you talked about uncertainty, doubt, anxiety, this search for purpose and all of that. I think, and you talked about how work is not as consuming as it used to be, which I completely agree. I think for a lot of people, maybe work has slowed down. Maybe some people find themselves in a little bit of an awkward limbo, like yourself, between jobs or in transiting. Well, maybe the nature of their job or the scope of their job is changing a little bit. They're cutting down on hours. Some people are having to take, work less days in a week, that kind of thing. And I think all of this is creating a sort of a sort of forced solitude that none of us really feel very comfortable with, right? I mean, if we are honest. And how would you say you've managed to journey in sort of resolving these personal challenges that you've faced or you've seen in your congregation, where people are just sort of searching for a foundation, to stand on? I mean, how have you personally navigated this? Yeah,
I'll share personally, not so much for the congregation. I think for me personally, I like to go about doing things. I like to keep busy. And for me personally, I think I'm learning for the first time, and I'll be very honest here, I'm learning that I'm not in control. And it's not been easy learning. Second, I'm learning to kind of overcome my desire for control. And, so I think that's a pretty deep learning. I think for a lot of us, this is a near Job moment, right? I know work is not everything. Work is not designed to be everything. But a lot of us have made our work everything. And so just like everything was taken away for Job, for many of us, when our work is taken away, it seems as if everything is taken away, right? And how do we respond in that moment? Are we still able to worship and trust in God? It's not easy. Of course, we lament. Of course, we grieve. Of course, we groan. But through that, are we kind of groaning facing God, or groaning facing away from God? So I think personally for me, it's kind of helped me turn to God, a lot more. I think I'm kind of personally experiencing a deeper intimacy, a fellowship with Him in His suffering, and so that's been very helpful. I think also I've had a lot of time reflecting on the theology of vocation. And I think during this time, I've learned to distinguish between the economic value of work and the biblical value of work. And, economic value of work is, as a business journalist, I like to see my job as a fairly high value job requiring a lot of skills. It pays well. And so in my mind, I had a hierarchy of work where jobs that were economically more productive were higher than jobs that were not. And so I had this really beautiful moment when I was doing the dishes at my home. And I just, in that moment, I just sensed, because I couldn't do much work as a business journalist. So and as I was doing the dishes, I just had a moment where I sensed God saying, hey, in this moment, this is as valuable before God as my work as a business journalist. And for me, I began to understand that God values all work equally. Biblically, the value of work is not based on economic value, but it's in the value of service. It's in the value of faithfulness. And that was a pretty big moment for a successful and I have to admit, oftentimes selfishly ambitious person. And it was a humbling moment. So, yeah.
I have to say that on behalf of all women and homemakers around the world, we say amen to what you just shared.
Keep doing the dishes.
Yeah. I'm going to enjoy it. Last night I was worshiping,
Yeah, that's a great revelation. That's about service and faithfulness. Yeah, and all work has value. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was very, very insightful. Mark, do you have anything that you'd like to add on? I'm sure you do.
Well, I respect too that many people around the world have had the pause button put on, that many people are out of work or have less hours. I think there's a whole huge cohort of people who actually have more work.
For sure.
Period. And the equilibrium has just kind of really been thrown out for lots of people and lots of communities and lots of families. I've moved from very high contact, high intensity work with lots of coaching with my staff, managing lots of clients, delivering events around trade promotion particularly, to perhaps much more digitally intensive work and much less contact. And I think I've probably struggled. I had the rug pulled out from under me because I'm not in my workplace any longer and won't be for some months. But I think particularly it's become very difficult for us to kind of try and manage everything at once. And Anand talks, of course, about doing the dishes. But I think at least, and what that says to me too, and Anand brought that out, I think the world's now considering really important things about work and about our vocation. I think it's actually a nice inflection point. The work we're called to do rather than the work that we're paid to do, right? Some of those things, if you're really lucky, you get to do both, right? But I think work and family and work and the walls that have previously divided our work and our family have been coming down. Our private lives and our professional lives have been melded. I don't know what that means for community or for people or for a Sabbath day of rest on a Sunday, because I mean, everyone's just going all the time. But, for instance, I have my kids harassing me while I speak on teleconferences. And I struggle to try and push them off out of the camera while I'm trying to deliver an interview or a performance review or a coaching session. And I think with global job losses, you know, we're looking at 17% youth unemployment here in Australia, which is the worst it's been in generations here. And with economic devastation, wholesale disruption to the way we work, and many of us will be working a lot longer than what we were going to, because our superannuation, our pensions have been affected. I think we're also starting to think about or questioning about our time, how we use our time, how we use our treasure for God, for the gospel, for the kingdom, particularly if we're Christians. And if you're a bit older or more financially comfortable, I think there's probably been even more consideration about our community, how we're bringing comfort, how we're living mercy out or justice to people around us. And look at the Black Lives Matter stuff that was perhaps exacerbated, I think, by the COVID pandemic. But I think the best and worst thing about COVID is its disruption. Disruption that we previously for everything that we previously did and everything we assumed and everything we lived, and the world looks so different, and the world of work will look so different. So I guess the question for each of us is, how am I going to use my time and treasure more effectively for the kingdom rather than getting fat and watching Netflix like I've been doing? So that's the $20 million question.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys all for bringing, you know, a bit of your perspective and your context into the conversation. I just wanted to talk a little bit and picking up on something that, you know, Anand had said towards the end of his sharing about how he had changed perspective, and for him that was about, you know, the value of work, and how he had a personal hierarchy of you know, what work is more valuable than others, and now he's having sort of this personal realization that all work is valuable, even doing the dishes, the most menial things. And Mark, you also sort of talked a little bit about that, about, you know, rethinking like how we use our time, how we use our treasure. And I just wanted to get your thoughts about how this whole pandemic and this whole COVID situation is sort of reframing your perspectives on work and on service to the Lord. So if any of you would like to chime in on that.
I think if I can just start the ball rolling, I think there are some things that we can consider. Many of us are in the position where we play different roles. We're bosses, we're leaders, or we're workers. And a lot of us are in between. We have people who report to us, and at the same time, we are answerable to our bosses above us. And in each of those roles, we are challenged to live in a way that witness the gospel. And I can think of a couple of pragmatic things that we have to look into. So like as an owner of a business and as a boss, we may have to face the reality of foregoing profit for the year. You know, it's just pretty much gone, you know, and see ways to increase our social responsibility and perhaps as much as possible to, if we're able to retain our staffs, prevent layoffs, prevent pay cuts, you know, and at the same time, taking the step to actually look into the welfare of the people who work under you, and then to think creatively to create new job opportunities that you otherwise have not needed to resort to in the past, just to supplement the income and to keep things going, you know, and to know that even as our workers fear us because we are the boss, but at the same time, God is our boss, and we fear him in reverence, you know. So I may be a boss to somebody else, but Jesus is my boss, you know. There's this culture in the workplace where when we hire people, we harvest them for their brains and we harvest them for the work of their hands in exchange for the wages that we pay them. You know, that's usually the arrangement. But I think as a Christian organization, what you want to look into is to see how when people join you, they effectively come under your leadership and care. You look out for them and you seek ways to help them grow and mature and to be confident in their role. And that means taking the time to observe and to see what they can do and to see how they can not just contribute to making your organization better, but how can you actually make their lives better in return. And I think if you're a ministry leader or if you're an industry leader, if you're in a position to make changes, to bring good changes, if you have the power to do that, if you're a policy maker, now is the time, to look into legislation, to perhaps create equal opportunities, to address discrimination, and to make decisions on the wider level that will impact a lot of people. And if you're a ministry leader, then I think oftentimes I think the problems that you face as a ministry leader is that it's always not the head issue, but the heart issue with the people. Yeah. It's a pastoral role. I mean, to some extent, you often get people who are quite competent to do what they do. Like if you get someone to do the accounts, he or she can do the accounts. They know how to do the accounts, and that's not why they have to come to you. Occasionally, you may need to hold their hands and just up the skill a bit. But people are multidimensional, and oftentimes what they struggle with is the spiritual things. And indirectly, you're discipling people. You keep pointing them to Jesus. And your job as a Christian leader is to take your cue from your king and to make decisions such a way where you are able to show them more and more of Christ. How you handle power and authority as a ministry leader says a lot about you. And what the Bible tells us is that the greatest among us shall be a servant of all. Because the greatest among us is Jesus, and he was a servant of all. He exercised leadership in meekness, and that is something that we can take our cue from. If you're a worker, if you're someone who, I know, like Mark says, this is a season of gratefulness for a lot of people who are still employed, and it may not be the same for anyone who's listening out there right now. Perhaps, just out of control, your role has been taken away from you. You do less, it's given away. You have asked to be terminated in some sense, and that your job is no longer available. But for those of you who still have your job, you have to be prepared to step up more, to do more, and to put in the hours. Perhaps you're asked to be ready to take on more challenge, to learn a new skill, and to be to be required to do more, simply because times are difficult. And Christians ought to do that, because Christians are people who are hardworking and have integrity. And this may be a time for you to be a contributor in terms of creativity and innovation, because Christians should be at the forefront of a change, and we are still bearers of good news each and every day, that we glorify God through our labor, because ultimately the big boss that we really answer to is God himself. So we keep being the witness, because people are watching. People are watching in times when it's good and we have it easy for us. But when times are hard, people are still watching us. And we want our witness to be so transparent in such a way that we do not need to feel that we have to overcompensate for something that we do not have, but rather to just live our life honestly, so that people can see the God that we worship, And I think biblically, I think biblically, work is ordained by God. We need to see that work is good and work is dignified. That Christians don't need to grudgingly go to work because they have to pay the bills, and then somehow secretly wish that they want to do better things, like being in ministry or something like that. I think in the eyes of God, all vocations are good. You are serving God regardless of what you do, whether it's a ministry or in a secular environment. Your work matters to God, because God used you to bring the blessing to other people. So there is no need to complain or be negative about it, but rather Christians should see that here is an opportunity for me to witness, through my integrity, through being blameless, from being hardworking and doing my best, that I'm careful and wise, to be accountable in what I do. Mark mentioned about the life of Joseph, which I thought was really good. I think of Joseph and Daniel in the Bible, and I think how they are, unlawfully dismissed for being godly, and terminated for being just being a good Christian. I can think of many reasons why some of us can be terminated or dismissed, but being blameless, because they witness to God. How many of us can actually say that? The system of the world is such that if I work harder, I play the game, and with the right timing and opportunity, I ought to be rewarded. I should get what I deserve. But for a Christian, it begins with the work of Christ, because that defines everything that we do. And our perspective comes from the cross. So my desires, my needs, they are already met and fulfilled at the cross by Jesus. And as much as my work brings satisfaction, my highest joy actually comes from my relationship with him. And because of that, because I belong to Jesus, then everything that I do now has new meaning and purpose. I do it for him, and that includes my job. I report to my master, and Jesus is the one that I serve. My priorities are reordered. How can I better love God and love my neighbor and myself in my work? How can I seek in prayer for wisdom and to apply it in my circumstances when I face challenges? I think the world says that, you need to work hard to get ahead, and that shapes your identity and your meaning, and that's what your reputation ought to be. But the Christian said, I'm already given the best gift in life. And in response, I no longer need to seek my affirmation constantly from my work, but instead I'm free to live in such a way that has eternity in mind, knowing that my reward is secured with him. And while I'm here, I'm going to do my best to give my glory to God in my work as an offering. I'm able to use the arena of my work to witness Christ. I'm not afraid to take rest and to give rest a proper perspective, such as now, perhaps for us, it's a season of rest, when I need to, because I know that ultimately my soul rests in God.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Sui. Sorry, I'm just gonna stop you there for a minute. I just
I'm so
what
sorry.
you said just now about being an employer and that perspective that you provided, and just having to have the opportunity now, especially in this season, to sort of live out your role as a shepherd of the people who are beneath you, who are under you. And of course the flip perspective is that of a worker, right, who you may be swimming in the midst of change right now, but if you're a Christian, we're called to shine wherever we're placed. And and I think that's those are really, really great thoughts. Mark, you had wanted to mention something. You wanted to jump in.
So I have a couple of dozen staff, and I think this has been the biggest learning for me, particularly during the COVID period. I'm generally a pretty hard taskmaster. I expect a lot from myself, and I expect a lot from my team. And in usual times where there's good tension and competition, that's a really good way of getting things done. But I think Sue talked really well. I mean, we could wrap up the panel here with what Sue had just talked about in terms of how a Christian brings him or herself to work. Because I've realised that I've not been living out that gospel with my team. I haven't been as humble as I could be. I haven't been the leader I could be. Many of my staff in India are now experiencing firsthand death during this pandemic. I've had several staff, now 3 staff lose their parents during COVID. And instead of being the leader, I think, who pushes to win, I've had to learn through COVID and through scripture, and Sue used the verse around whoever would be great among you must be your servant, whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. Instead of being the leader who pushes to win, I think that COVID perhaps has taught me, and I think it'll teach many of us, that I need to be a leader who's agile, who pushes to serve, who's humble, and agile around the very real needs of my staff in this very difficult time.
Yeah, wow. Thanks a lot, Mark. Anand, do you have anything that you'd like to share on this point?
Yeah, I have a couple of things I'd like to share. I think what I've personally been sensing God doing in my own life, and I think that's happening in a lot of people's lives as well, is I think God's been clarifying our identities, and he's also been sanctifying our motives through the entire COVID thing. I'll talk about clarifying our identities. I think most Asian economies are kind of similar. It's very performance-driven culture.
Yeah.
If you're a lawyer, you're only as good as the last case you won. If you are in sales, you're only as good as the last quarter sales. If you're a journalist, you're only as good as the last story you wrote. So the performance-driven culture of the world is kind of constantly demanding we prove ourselves again and again and again. And what that's done is that kind of led to an intertwining, a very deep and unhealthy intertwining of our identities and our work.
Yeah.
We've become our work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of a lot of Asian economies and Asian cultures. India is definitely like that. And so now suddenly there's no work, or there's very less work or different work, And so I think God's been clarifying our identities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think God's been helping me see, and I think God's kind of helping people see that we are not defined. Our identity is not defined by what we do. As Sue was sharing, what we do is a joyful response to what Christ has already done on our behalf. So we are not earning our worth, significance, value, identity through our work. Christ has already done that. Our significance is in him. Our identity is in him. And what we're doing, our work is just a outflow. And so it's clarifying. I think it's shifting away our identities from our work back onto Christ. The crisis is doing that. I mean, this entangling of identity and work, which is so hard to separate, I think the crisis is kind of separating. So that's one in terms of clarifying our identities. I think the COVID crisis is also sanctifying our motives. And I'll speak as a pastor now. I think the last 3 months, I've only been, our church services are on Zoom. So I've been preaching to my iPad screen for the last, 10, 12 weeks, every Sunday, And I've been seeing that my motivation, my personal motivation to work on my sermon has been less and less. And it's been an area of struggle for me. And I began to reflect on that. Why am I feeling less motivated to prepare a good sermon? And I began to see inside my own heart, and I could see that not only was I preaching to serve people, which is a good godly motive, but I was also preaching to win people's approval, people's applause. And now that's gone. How much applause can an iPad screen give you, in that sense? And so I've had to kind of sanctify. And I began to see that, in the context of pastoral work, pastoral vocation, preaching a good sermon and people being blessed are not mutually exclusive from the perspective of the listeners. But from my perspective, they can be mutually exclusive. My heart, in its own idolatrous nature, can desire only to preach a good sermon and not really care whether people are being blessed, And so it's kind of sanctifying my motives, and my lack of motivation sometimes in preparing for the sermon kind of tells me, hey, what really is my motive? What's changed? Why was I motivated so much 3 months ago? And I'm struggling to find motivation now. And I've been repenting. And, I've really been deeply repenting, and I'm beginning to see my idolatries in a way I haven't seen before. And that's been taking me to the cross. I mean, that's been taking back to the core of the gospel. That is, hey, I am not what I do. I am what Christ has done for me. And that's been liberating and very helpful in this season.
It's really good. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
It's very good.
Yeah, I mean, we're 15 minutes left to the hour. If there are any questions from any of you who are watching, please feel free to filter them in, and we'll try our best to answer them. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I just wanted to pose this question to the panelists. I mean, what would you say to the person who's watching this, who's struggling with a season of uncertainty or feeling just very overwhelmed with the current situation, whether it's the lack of work, too much work, juggling work and family and all of these things? What would you say to that person to try and sort of help them make sense of the situation with the gospel in mind?
I think, Thea, what I would say is that the idea that the Christian is living a life in tension is not new, because we live in the now and not yet. We live post-cross, and we're waiting for Christ to return. And we're constantly in this state of transition and tension, between the two. And so it's nothing new for a Christian. And the COVID doesn't make it any different. A lot of the things that we are called to do remains the same, that our calling and our vocation in God remains the same. Our service remains the same. If I could just be general about this, is that I think perhaps as we are opening up, depending on the roles that we play, there are different kind of trials and temptations that we have to look out for as we go into it. So perhaps like if you're in business, if you have always been someone who sees your profit as an end goal, then perhaps you need to relook at that and see how else can you redistribute the wealth to be able to support more of other people, rather than to just take home the entire pie that you're used to, and to see how can I now take what I have, take what is necessary for myself, and then to kind of open up and redistribute the wealth to be able to reach others. Many of us will have to kind of pass on the rising cost of living because of what has happened. Do we raise prices because we absolutely have to, or do we want to take advantage of the situation of panic and desperation when we do that? In terms of our leadership role, are we hard-handed in the way we handle people? Can we be more generous, perhaps? Or do we have a tendency to write people off when they make a mistake? Or can we be more gracious and patient with those under us, just as how God has been very patient with us. I think the need for self-protection will always be a temptation for us. Yeah. And so we need to kind of like be very careful about that and say, okay, there is a need to provide for my family, and that is a good witness. But how much I take for myself and how much of it I can give to others is a question that we need to ask. Yeah. We need to question ourselves if along the way we have been relying on some form of cheap labor, perhaps, that someone else have been paying the cost so that we are able to benefit from this. Are we exploiting the vulnerables in the way we make decisions? We can't say that, oh, it's got nothing to do with me, but if we benefit from it, then it's got something to do with us. I know that a lot of people are trying to prolong their cash flow. And so are we tempted to perhaps deny rightful wages to people in any way? Are we delaying their pays? Because then the Bible says that if we do that, the cries of the workers reach the Lord. Are we cutting corners? And perhaps if none of those things, maybe it's just as simple as honoring our words, keeping promises. Some of the promises that we have made before the lockdown, if we can and are able to, it's going to come at a higher cost, but do we want to do the right thing? Do we want to have integrity and be consistent? Are we making ethical decisions that are socially responsible by upholding justice? And I think one of the things that we have to be really careful about, and I agree with Anand, is this, that we associate so much of our identity with the things that we do. And as soon as the lockdown is lifted, we're very quick to jump back in because we want to be relevant. We want to be wanted. We want to be busy so that we look like we're in demand, that we're very popular and that our lives are glamorous, And so we have a tendency to overcompensate. We want to kind of put on this coat of busyness because it hides all of the insecurities that we actually have, And so what if you're not as in demand as you were before? It's not there's no need to paint a rosy picture just because we feel that we're so afraid what people think of us. If you want to know how much you base your identity on your job, this is a real test for you, because that's the first thing that you talk about. That's the first thing you want people to know about you. You're very eager to explain and boost about your job title and give some form of power display, because that's your armor, And perhaps you might think, well, that's not me. I'm not as exaggerated as that. But maybe you're just someone who's a little bit more subtle, like you kind of want to have the best of both worlds. You want to have your cake and eat it too. Like you want fame, but you also want to be a follower of Christ. So you say on Sunday, I'm this really good, Christian, a leader in my church community. But from Monday to Friday, I'm an attorney and I'm famous, I'm cutthroat in what I do. You can't serve two masters. And I'm not saying that we need to be quite
Sue, about living in the tension. And I think exactly what you're talking about now is, just that, that tension of the identity of the Christian, right? And I think all of us are feeling really that out right now, where work is sort of sometimes, it's either threatening to overtake our identities, or it's like fading to the background, and then we're left in this sort of no man's land where we suddenly don't really know where we stand. And and your call, I really love what you said about having to, the call of Christian is still the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so the circumstances and life may change for us, but that, our call as a Christian to do good, to walk humbly, to love mercy, those are all still the same things. And all those things that we talked about, integrity and just, being a person of your word, really, where if you can afford it, those are all like really great thoughts. So thank you so much for that. Mark and Anand, do you guys I'm just conscious of the time. We have 7 minutes left on the clock. Do you guys have anything?
I'll be very brief
first,
and leave it to the minister to round us out. But I think for me, what keeps coming out is, of course, our mission is still the same. But unfortunately, all of our idols are still much the same, and all of our issues are still the same. Our hearts are still that idol factory that produces more each and every day. And I think for me, one of the best things about COVID again is it reflects where my confidence lies. And Anand's talked a lot about that. Where does my confidence lie? Does it lie in my job or my status or my ego or my role? And speaking as a diplomat particularly in a developing country, I've got to be constantly watching and checking my ego and repenting for that, because that's part and parcel. I have increasingly married a lot of my life, my work together, my vocation, all of it sits in this idolatrous factory sometimes, and there's a lot of repentance that needs to happen in that sense. But so if I was watching this and trying to perhaps talk about one thing, and that's kind of about trust and about confidence. And Sue spoke about Joseph earlier. I think that's the kind of perfect story about where confidence lies, and where the path of God or the journey for God is very different, or the outcome is very different than what we might expect. And COVID's thrown all of our work, all of our lives up in this awful tamasha, as it would be in Hindi, this awful chaos and of course that's what happened to Joseph. He's thrown into a well, he's sold into slavery by his own family. His family eventually come to him in Egypt, and of course we know the beautiful, lovely story, the gospel-centered story about when Joseph says, "You meant evil against me, but God used it for good." I mean, we've got to constantly come back to repenting of our idols and fundamentally assessing where our confidence lies. Because if our confidence is not in the cross, then our work is worthless, and our gospel is worthless. So I think that's my view. I'd love Anand perhaps to round it out too.
Yeah, Pastor, will you do us the favor?
Yeah, sure. So I think, the question was, what would you share that can help people who are watching? And I think I have something very simple to share, which is embrace the season. God is not surprised by what's happening in the world, in your country, in your city, and in your life. He is not surprised. And he's sovereign, and things are going according to his good pleasure. And so I think as followers of Christ, I think there's a certain embracing of the season. And this plays out in many ways. One is to not be afraid of the pain or the hardship or the suffering that we are all enduring. They're going to work out for good. They're going to shape us. So not to be afraid of that. The second thing I would say, and I think that's important, is do not be afraid to rest. Maybe you've done a great job worshiping God through your work the past many years. And maybe this is a season that God wants to teach you to worship him through rest. And don't be afraid of rest. And there's so many doomsayers about the economy, maybe the world's going to slip into recession. That's possible. I don't want to rule it out. It's possible. But I also want to see God's pattern, God's rhythms. If I look at the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus, God instructed the Israelites to plow the land for 6 years. On the 7th year, to let it rest. So Israel had a lockdown once every 7 years for 1 full year, and the economy flourished. And hey, in God's sovereignty, we don't have to be Of course we should be worried. Of course we should grieve. Of course we have emotions. That's real. But we don't have to be overly worried. So embrace the season. And if this is a season of rest, rest well. And we often mistake rest and recreation. We confuse the two. So rest is not binge watching Netflix till 3-4 a.m. in the morning. I mean, watch Netflix. I'm not saying don't watch it. But I think having a rhythm, this is a world where there are no work hours. We can just mess up rhythms. God works through rhythms. God's created us to live with rhythms. So embrace the season. Be aware of God's rhythms, and don't be afraid of suffering. It's going to be hard, but His grace is going to be with us. His grace is sufficient.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much, each of you, Mark, Sue, and Anand, for taking the time to share your thoughts, your experiences, your journey, and what you've learned through this season with all of us. I'm sure everyone who's watched is going to be very blessed, as I have. I myself have learned some things from what you guys have shared today. So I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time. To everyone else who's watching, feel free to join us on the next roundtable when we next organize one. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Thea. Thank you so much. Thanks.